All right, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there as I got through some technical difficulties. The Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is live here on November 25th, 2024. I'm Kris Baker here with Matthew Fairburn, Sabres beat writer for The Athletic. You can find all of Matthew's work at theathletic.com/Sabres, serving up a pretty regular diet of Sabres nuggets. And Matthew's been feverishly covering the Sabres here over this little stretch of games that they've been successful on. So Matthew and I, back on November 5th, I believe it was, Matthew, we outlined a 10-game stretch that the Sabres were embarking on leading into Thanksgiving. And we, at that time, called it the most important stretch of Kevyn Adams' tenure as general manager of the Buffalo Sabres. And by the way, get used to that from this show. I think every 10-game stretch moving forward is going to be the most important of Kevyn Adams' tenure. But why did we do that? Well, the Sabres coming into this season talked about being in win-now mode. They were sliding down the standings at the time, didn't get off to the greatest of starts to the season. And this 10-game block featured a group of very winnable games. So the Sabres have gone thus far. They're 9 games into that 10-game block that we teed up a couple of weeks back. They've gone 7-2. So I think they've hit the target despite some lineup adversity. So in the big picture, Matthew, before I pass it over to you, Sabres are 11-9-1. That's good for 23 points and a 548 points percentage. Right now, they're in a playoff position. I want to talk a little bit about that position with you, though, right? Because when you look at the standings in terms of raw points, they're in one place, but in reality, they're maybe in a different position. Would you like to maybe explain that a little bit?
Yeah, they are. When you look at the NHL standings page, they're in third place in the Atlantic, but by my measure, they are not in third place in the Atlantic. Their points percentage is fourth in the Atlantic. The Tampa Bay Lightning have a 579 points percentage. They are 10-7-2, a point behind the Sabres, but they have 2 games in hand. So I don't think it's the most. I know it's fun for the standing screenshots and the eyeball emojis and the, look at where the Sabres are, third place, but really Tampa Bay should not be forgotten here. I don't think the Sabres have passed Tampa Bay, but right now they have passed Boston, and they're putting some space between themselves and Ottawa and Detroit. I think Boston and the Islanders are the 2 other legitimate contenders for that second wild card spot. And yes, the Sabres have put themselves in a spot where they're going to push Tampa Bay for third in the Atlantic. They just have not yet passed them. As we gauge Buffalo's progress, I think we can't yet put Tampa in the rearview mirror.
And Tampa is going to burn one of those 2 games in hand that they have. They play tonight. So that's a game for Sabres fans to watch. They host Colorado. I think it's 7:00. So definitely keeping an eye on that. At least it's kind of fun to watch other teams with the implications.
The scoreboard watching is fantastic. I mean, we outlined that 10-game stretch, right? And basically said they need to get to a point where they're in the thick of it by this time, American Thanksgiving, which is a traditional benchmark for a lot of reasons. And when you look at the standings, they are in a much better, they could have gone one or two directions. They could be where they are right now. They've gone 7-2 during this 9-game stretch. The 10-game season we outlined finishes on Wednesday night when they host the Wild on Thanksgiving Eve. And they've done about as well as you would have hoped. And I'm looking at teams like Detroit and Ottawa that over and over again, since I've been covering the Sabres, have been talked about in that batch of teams, with Buffalo in the Atlantic trying to rebuild. And it's a subtle difference, right? Because the Sabres are 11-9-1, but Detroit's 8-10-2. Ottawa is 8-11-1, both below 500 in points percentage. And the Sabres are comfortably ahead of both in goal differential. That is a big deal. And I do think teams like Tampa and Boston, the Islanders just seem like they're the Islanders, right? Year after year, they're hanging around this mix, and they're going to be a pesky out all season long. Boston and Tampa, look more human than they have in a long time. And if the Sabres are taking advantage of some teams sliding back. Another weird thing to point out in the standings right now is the Sabres are 2 points behind the Florida Panthers, who have lost 3 straight. And
That's the other side of this. Yep.
they played the same amount of games. So all of a sudden, the Atlantic Division does look pretty wide open. The Leafs are still playing really well and have a comfortable lead on first place, but the Sabres will be there in a couple of weeks. They've got some games coming up against Boston. They have 2 games against the Islanders in the span of a couple weeks. But yes, to your point, the scoreboard watching is fun, right? Each night, even if the Sabres aren't playing, you can look around, and they've gotten some good results over the last few days between Ottawa slumping, Florida slumping. Now I think Sabres fans will be watching Tampa, Boston, the Islanders really closely as long as this race is going on. I suppose Philly and Columbus are hanging around, but I think as far as your legitimate threats, the Athletic posts daily the playoff projections from Dom's model, and the Sabres, by his measure, have a 24% chance to make the playoffs, which is pretty high compared to where it's been most of the season. And based on those percentages, it's Boston, it's obviously Tampa, the Islanders that are real threats. Ottawa is still a team that the models seem to like. I don't know how serious a threat they are given how poorly things have gone lately, but gives you an idea that the Sabres they're in this thing, which when we started that talk about the 10-game season wasn't, it was up in the air which way it was going to go. And they have 2 really ugly losses. The 2 out of the 7-2 was really bad, but they took care of business in the other 7. And that's how you get to this point.
Yeah, just the last little bit too on the standings. I think when you look at the Atlantic Division, there's a couple things that stick out like sore thumbs. So we've talked a little bit about Tampa. The Bruins, they get back in action tomorrow against Vancouver, leading into Thanksgiving. So the Bruins have played one more game than the Sabres. The Sabres have scored, even with that game in hand that they have on the Bruins, 18 more goals than Boston has this year. The one, when you're just looking from, you zoom back from the standings page and there's a red number that sticks out, and it's the Bruins minus 19 goal differential. So they've won 2 straight games, but at what point are they going to start scoring goals and maybe getting their goaltending back? If both of those things happen, it makes them even more real of a threat to me. Just given the experience of the team, coaching changeover, it's kind of another interesting wrinkle with them. So
it was an
very
interesting
much
week
in it, even though, yes,
in the Atlantic, because if you looked at just a snapshot of the headlines in the Atlantic Division, while the Sabres were going on this little run in California, you had the Bruins firing their coach, right? And nothing says early season, disaster like firing your coach in November. But then the Red Wings, Max Boltman, our Red Wings writer at the Athletic, had a big column up that was like, where do the Red Wings go from here? Right. So there's existential crisis happening in Detroit. Ottawa's on a 4-game losing streak. Florida's trying to, stop their little losing streak. So while the Sabres were hanging out on the West Coast, soaking in the sun, collecting points, there was some turmoil elsewhere in the division, which is exactly what they want.
Yeah, I think you'll start to see some separation here after Thanksgiving for the Sabres. And another thing that we talked about leading into this 10-game mini season was take control of your destiny now, bank the points, don't rely on Detroit to slide in the second half, or don't rely on your need to go on one of these crazy winning streaks to climb back up the ladder late in the season. Bank those points now. But you're right. I think there's, in orbit of the Sabres in the division, there's a lot happening. Sabres need to go 1 game at a time at this point, and their next game is Wednesday night against a very good Minnesota team who has collected 30 points in their first 20 games this season. I was looking at how Minnesota has done it, and they're 9-1-3 on the road. And I think there were some question marks about the Wild coming into this game, about Kaprizov, their world-class player, MVP candidate, took a nasty hit in their last game. It sounds like your counterpart Mr. Russo there, who covers the Wild for The Athletic, had mentioned that Kaprizov was taking line rushes today. So maybe they dodged a little bit of a bullet. So you might take a run at their best. You always want to, I know there's fans like to look at it two ways. I go back to like Bills Patriots. And if Brady was hurt, they're like, yeah, let's go get him. And I'm always like, no. I want to match up against their best and see where you're at. And that's kind of how I'm looking at this game if he does indeed play on Wednesday. So observations, Matthew. So let's just kind of shift gears and do a little bit of a rewind, because we've talked a little bit about this 10-game snapshot here in the big picture, 7-2, can't ad nauseum, right? Sabres go out west, sweep the Kings, Ducks, and Sharks. I think it's been a while since they ran the table there. I don't know if you had a number on that.
They have not done it since the Ducks entered the league with a California specific trip like that. So that's what, 30 years, 31 years ago, I think, that the Ducks entered the league. So they've had a sweep on a trip like that included one of the Western Canada teams, I think Vancouver at the time, maybe 10 plus years ago. So it's been a while, and a gritty 3 wins, I would say. They get the 1-0 win against the Kings. UPL pitches a shutout in his first game back from injury. Jason Zucker scores the goal just down the street from where he grew up. And they get some time off. They get practice in, I think, on Thursday, and then they need a comeback to beat the Ducks. A Ducks team that's playing all right. John Gibson had a good game, but they get the comeback and they win in overtime. They get the game to overtime. They win it. Tuck forces a turnover. Yuri Kulik comes up with the play to finish the goal. And then maybe the most impressive of the three, even though it was the least impressive opponent, they get into San Jose, after 2 a.m. because they had to travel, and they're playing a back-to-back. Usually on that trip, the back-to-back is LA and Anaheim, if there is one, because the travel required isn't, obviously you can basically stay in the same hotel, which the Sabres usually do. So they have that travel to San Jose, not crazy travel, but still not great. And the game started a little bit early because they were doing, Joe Thornton's jersey retirement. And so it was a 5 o'clock local time puck drop. So less than 24 hours after the Sabres had played in Anaheim. Clearly they didn't have their best legs, but James Reimer delivered a standout performance. Alex Tuck, with a shorthanded goal in the third period, they had to come back again. So 3 close, often ugly wins, but all of it done without Tage Thompson, who did not play at all on this road trip. And that felt like a maturation from this Sabres team. We've talked a lot early in the season about how reliant they are on Tage Thompson and how much Tage Thompson was carrying them playing at that world-class level he found 2 seasons ago. Well, now without him in the lineup, without Jordan Greenway, their best penalty killer, they go 12 for 12 on the penalty kill in California. Guys stepping up into roles and delivering. That, to me, was pretty impressive. James Reimer hadn't played in like a month and goes and delivers that performance against his old team. It was encouraging in a lot of ways. We'll get into some of what was, what about this Sabres team looks legit and what might be concerning. But any way you slice it, getting 6 points on that road trip is massive.
A couple things. Yeah, there was a lot going on with the team, and you just hit on a lot of them when they got into California. Missing Tage, and I'll argue, he is clearly their best forward. There's no questioning that. And I think that they also were missing their most consistent forward, Greenway, and you already mentioned him. And we've seen this team play down to the level of the competition. And there's not many nights, like, we already talked about the Montreal game. I think they're from top to bottom in the lineup, they don't match up very well with the Sabres, right? Philly, you can make the argument as well. The team goes there, they play a backup that hasn't seen the ice in a while, and they didn't play down. Even though they got into an early hole, They didn't play down to the level of the competition. That's a big thing that you need to see from this team moving forward, is winning the games that on paper you're supposed to win. If you get down, find a way to battle back. And they did it without their best forward and maybe their most consistent forward. I thought that was noteworthy. They juggled the lines like crazy because of who's been missing. Saw some different pairs, some interesting combinations. We're not going to really dive into that today, really. But there is this whole thing sets up. I think this was a big trip for the guys. And I think it sets up for some interesting conversations that you and I are going to have maybe later this week about structure of the team moving forward, different elements, the emergence of Yuri Kulik, and what does that do? Is he all the way there? I'm really interested to talk to you about that. But I think we should stay on track today and go down the path of some of the stats and what's real and what isn't with this team right now. And you were so kind to put together some show notes today. I'm impressed. I am impressed.
Kris usually does the heavy lifting on the show notes for those who wonder. He's a stickler.
I need it. I need it. I am. I'm running a tight ship here. I want to keep the show moving. I want to make this a good experience for the audience that's so kind to commit some of their time to listening to me, Babber, and you give good info. But no, I like what you put together today. You'd already mentioned the 12 for 12 PK in California without Greenway, and that's really been a problem. Frankly, they were giving up shorthanded goals early in the season. They were putting themselves in jail on special teams because they weren't connecting early on their own power play, and they were not doing so great, right? They were inconsistent, I would say, on the PK. So that's that. I'm glad that you shared that because that was eye-opening. And for those that aren't aware, I was traveling last week, so I'm really relying on Matthew to kind of bring the heat today as I get back up to speed on what's been happening with this team. I watched the games, but I was also just like, whatever, decompressing from some long days. But I didn't want to gloss over the PK, but I do want to talk about the goaltending a little bit because we saw the dynamics change a little bit with Devin Levi going down. I think it's been pretty clear what my opinion was. I wanted Devin Levi to at least hang out for the road trip and give him one of those games because you saw him have this gap between his starts. And this was an opportunity to maybe get him a little bit more action. Right. Well, it worked out, by the way. You throw Reimer in there and you were probably loving it. You're like, yeah, Kris, take that. And those are super important points because when this comes down, like when all is said and done, if the Sabres are in this at the end of the year and heaven forbid they make the playoffs by 1 or 2 points, we're going to go back and talk about that James Reimer performance.
It was a huge decision because basically they were making that decision to say Reimer is playing the next non-UPL game, not Levi. And I think the fact that it was against San Jose, I mean, either way, whether, UPL had maybe not had a great game against LA and they thought about splitting up the back-to-back a little differently, Reimer was going to get one of his old teams, right? But he did spend a decent amount of time in San Jose as opposed to Anaheim. And maybe that mattered in a rink he's comfortable in. And, some players, there's been some turnover, but maybe a few players he's familiar with.
I think the sight lines matter, by the way, with goaltenders. I do, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think you're right. And I think, playing a back-to-back the second half, knowing that you need just a steadying presence in there, they needed those 2 points. And so if they had kept Levi, or even if Reimer hadn't played well and they lose that game, that is the type of decision. It's the little things, right, that add up over the course of the season to get out of there. I think that was huge to get that performance from Reimer because we didn't know. When the last time we spoke was after that Philly game that Devin Levi didn't have his best, but they weren't the best in front of him either. And we talked at length about whether he should go down and what was next for him. I think it was Monday they sent him down. And the big unknown we had at that time was, what are they going to get out of Reimer? Because we were looking at the schedule thinking, UPL is going to get most of these games anyways, but there are a couple of spots where either you shuttle Levi in or you play James Reimer. If they can play James Reimer, and he's not going to play like that every time he gets in the net, but if he plays, if he can be even what Craig Anderson was a few years ago, right? That guy that plays once in a while and gives you solid outings and can steal a game or two.
Very good. surprisingly, Craig Anderson was very good. I think that's a great comparison.
And it takes, I think, a veteran to be able to have those chunks of time off. It actually worked to Craig Anderson's benefit. His body was fresher, his mind was fresher, and he was able to really deliver when they did play him. That's actually something that you could argue was maybe a bigger need than we were making it out to be in the summer, is having a veteran goalie, a tandem. We were texting during one of the games Friday or Saturday about, was the early season inconsistency from Levi giving Lindy some flashbacks to New Jersey, right? The inconsistent goaltending he got. And I don't think he wants to be undone by goaltending again. And Luukkonen has clearly earned his trust. We'll get into some numbers on Luukkonen, but having Reimer could be a really big deal if he can be that steady veteran presence, which maybe if you limit his exposure and don't play him so much, you can get that from him. And that's a difference maker. It really has nothing to do at this point for me with Levi. Like, I'm not concerned about Levi's development. I'm not concerned about his long-term potential. I even think he'll probably see the net again at some point. Odds tell you somebody will get dinged and, he'll have to play again. And I think he'll be better for having gone down to the AHL. But the combination of a guy that's already emerged, a guy that has already begun to establish himself as a legit number one in Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and just a solid veteran who can give you games like you got on Saturday, I think that is a much healthier dynamic than two young guys. One who is obviously ahead in UPL, but then another guy who is completely unproven at this level. If you are serious about win now, and if you are serious, to your point, the margins here are going to be super thin. The Sabres have put themselves in a nice position. They're in a playoff spot. They don't have a massive cushion. They don't have even built up what Washington has built, in the Metro, where they've really gotten off to a strong start, or Minnesota. They are going to be fighting this thing all season long, and every 2 points, there's going to be a lot of emotional swings here for this group. So you need a guy back there that you can count on. It's one game, but it almost makes me wonder why they got rid of him in the first place.
Reimer, well, yeah, we should get into that a little bit. I mean, my thought on Reimer right now, he's 36 years old?
Yes.
God, I remember when I was 36. So if you were to ask him, I think the coaching staff can go to Reimer and say, hey, what's your rhythm? Reimer's not going to say, I want to play every night. He knows his role in the organization, where he slots in the whole big picture of NHL goaltenders. Get ahead of that with him. Ask him what his rhythm is. And then you can kind of build out that schedule a little bit, not too far in advance, but then UPL knows, Reimer knows, and kind of have an idea. I think it's going to be helpful for this team. Reimer will have better time to prepare. UPL, you can manage his minutes in the crease better. I think that would be an interesting, and they likely are doing that, by the way. They may already know, what's your rhythm, James. But no, I was really impressed with him. It was kind of funny. I just wanted him to make that first save. I was skeptical. I was like, oh man, this could be a shit show.
He was a little clunky,
and he made that first save, and he was he looked a little clumsy in the crease at the beginning of the game. I was like, oh man, but no, great performance. They don't win that game without a lot of the stops that he made. And it was kind of funny. He, with the exception of that one kind of windmill save, little rhyme time action there with catching on the backhand, he was very positionally sound. It was like he was half asleep, and that's good. I always said that about Ryan Miller. When Ryan Miller was at his best, it looked like he was like nearly asleep, because he was just he knew the patterns of the game. He knew where the shots were going to be coming from. He's seen everything come at him so many times. But anyways, I'm curious to see when Reimer gets another start, but I do want to shift back to UPL, because we came into this season saying, you asked me on the eve of the season, will the Sabres make the playoffs? And I was put on the spot, and I said yes, with the caveat that they needed the goaltending, because we weren't all the way knowing if that second half that UPL had last year was real, or if he would maybe come back down to earth a little bit. Or was he riding a high, or was he going to keep going and build on the momentum that he gained in the second half of last season and become a real steady rock in the crease? Looks like he has, but you have some numbers to share. and you're going to have your own opinion if UPL is definitely real right now.
You know, as we're looking at like what's real and what's not with the Sabres, goaltending is always such a tricky one, right? Because I think even the best goalies in the league, you know, sometimes it's hard to predict year to year, month to month, game to game what you're going to get. But I just have the feeling watching him and looking at the numbers that like Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is it. Like he is a legitimate number one. He's 10th in the NHL in goals saved above expected. And that is that makes him a top 10 goalie, and that feels right. You know, he didn't have the best start to the season. He had that ugly game against Montreal when he was playing through an injury. I'm not, you know, that 10th in goal saved above expected is not cherry picking like, oh, if you throw out the Montreal game or if you take out October, you know, that's what he is on the totality with his bad games and, you know, what he's done. The way he played on this road trip was rock solid. And I've just gotten the feeling watching him outside of that Montreal game that he looks like the guy from last year. And really, that Montreal game, all it reminded me of was that game they played him. I believe they played him on a back-to-back at some point in the second half last year. They were just getting greedy. They were like, this guy's rolling, and we're just going to keep playing him. And he did not play well. And it was like, well, that's what you get for trying to play this guy too often. But that's all that felt like, that Montreal game. Just a blip. Knowing that he was playing through injury, all of a sudden I wasn't too concerned, only hoping he would come back healthy and regain what he had, and he did on this trip. So he feels like a calming presence for this team compared to what Levi was, and so does Reimer. And I think for a young team, particularly young defense, that's important. You know, a little bit of predictability back there in the crease. Devin Levi, maybe a little bit all over the place at times early this season. But no, I think what we're seeing from Luukkonen is legitimate. I think he is, it could always fall off a cliff, but I think we have a big enough sample size at this point with Luukkonen that he is the type of goalie who can help them not just be a contender, but get to the playoffs, because like we talked about at the beginning of the season, they're going to need above average goaltending, not just average. For a while, you know, a couple of years ago, it was like, man, if they could just get average goaltending, they'd probably get in the playoff. Now, I do think the way they're built, they need above average goaltending. I think they're getting it. And I don't see any reason to think they won't continue to get it. I mean, he has been, if you do narrow it down from just November, he has a .933 save percentage and a 1.77 goals against average. Again, counting that Montreal game, that's going to win you a lot of games and steal you a lot of
Vezina
points.
level.
Yeah, I mean that's outstanding. It's during that month, it's actually still not the best in the NHL, but it's up there. You know, it's right. It's like last season, towards the end of the season, how he was playing. I think he's refound that form after maybe struggling to find it early in the season.
Getting those numbers to stay steady. Again, I think this was a winnable stretch of games. I've made the argument in the past that this recent stretch was probably the easiest. Okay, nothing's easy in the NHL, but on paper, their greatest opportunity to bank points in a 10-game block than they have for the rest of the season. Getting him to do that the rest of the way, then you're definitely going. It's going to confirm everything that you just said. If he maintains that baseline that he's just set, that's going to be critical. We saw the other kind of interesting, I guess, dynamic here with the goaltending is that we really saw UPL get a lot of confidence and really get on top of his game last year once they sent Levi down. Levi's now down again. So now you wonder if that's another little dynamic that I'm going to be keeping an eye on here. Goaltenders are weird, right? But to your point about his calmness, his composure in the crease, I think that's like of critical importance to a hockey team. I've said this a lot. I come from a goaltending family. I kind of understand their psychology and their impact on teams. I've seen it at multiple levels of hockey. It's a reason why I hated Robin Lehner losing his mind trying to fight Dustin Byfuglien and these other guys when he was in the crease, and Jordan Binnington, why I think that he's just an absolute, I have nothing but not great things to say about Binnington, you know, because again, I think that impact on the team, you want that calmness, send out like a wave to the rest of the guys in front of you. UPL does that. So it's going to be very interesting to see if you can keep it going. When we talked earlier, I want to get away from goaltending for a second, unless you want to put a bow on anything there.
No, I think that about covers it. I mean, you almost want to forget your goalie's back there sometimes, right? And I feel like
Totally.
UPL is kind of that way. And I feel like at least the early season version we saw of Levi was not that way, right? There was a little bit of scrambliness and unpredictability to his game, handling the puck even, and in some of his reads. And it's just noticeable flipping between the two. And it's what they also got out of Reimer on Saturday, right? Like a lot of his saves, you got the highlight reel one, which was really the initial save was a nice save, but somewhat routine that hit his glove, and then he windmilled it behind. I mean, a crazy save that really was more about the positioning anyways on the initial stop. A lot of the other saves he had were just textbook, in the right position, doing the right thing, reading the play, calm. It's calm veteran presence that if you're going to be a young team, you need to be, at least steady in the net. And I think they have that. I could eat those words. This could go sideways. You never know. But that's the weird thing about goalies. But to my eye, also a former goalie myself. Well, once a goalie, always a goalie, I suppose. But to my eye, they've got two decent ones going right now.
Yeah, and with 2 children, you're going to continue being a goalie at home.
That's right.
Whether or not you have skates on. So if we go back to the stretch of games, they're 9 games into the 10-game mini season, and we've seen the Sabres go on winning streaks in the past. So I don't want to sit here and say that this is the equivalent of some of those like longer winning streaks that the Sabres had maybe the past decade. But we knew that maybe some of those runs weren't real, maybe because of some outlier shooting percentages or one guy going on a heater and providing, a crazy amount of goals. What have you seen? Because like my first inclination was, okay, like in trying to determine like how are they winning? Are they shooting at a higher percentage than normal? You looked into this, right? And kind of came up with an answer on, are there any outlier shooting percentage metrics in this stretch of games that we've teed up here?
So their shooting percentage at all strengths is just over 13% during this stretch, which is second best in the league. Shooting percentage at 5-on-5, just over 11%, fourth best in the league. But their season-long shooting percentage at 5-on-5 is just over 10%, so they're sixth best there. Typically, that's something that's going to come back down to earth a little bit. And certainly during this stretch at all strengths, they've been, shooting a little bit above their weight. They're not getting insane save percentage at, 5-on-5 during this stretch. So they're in an interesting spot because I think the biggest number that stands out to me as maybe a red flag of what we're seeing is that during this stretch, they have, let me find the number. So since the start of the 7-2 stretch, the Sabres are 10th in the NHL with a 54% goals for percentage at 5-on-5. So just their 5-on-5 goal differential, but they're 27th in the NHL with a 46% expected goals percentage at 5-on-5. So the expected goals, there's a pretty big gap between that and the actual goals. Speaks to the shooting percentage, right? They're,
I have them at a +9 and that actual versus expected goals. And that's still in like the top 5 or 6 in the league. And when you look like Minnesota, the Rangers, Winnipeg are all up there.
It's how you stack wins, right? Is you kind of shoot above your skis a little bit for a little while. Now the 46% expected goals at 5-on-5, you'd like to see that be better, closer to 50%, really. And then be shooting above your skis instead of being, lagging behind in that area. But the goal differential is usually, there's so many useful and fun advanced stats in hockey, but sometimes when you want to simplify, I feel like goal differential on the whole is a good way to do it, especially as the season goes on and you see, the sample size grow. The Sabres have a better goal differential than the Panthers right now. They're at +4, third best in the Atlantic, not as good as any of the top 4 teams in the Metro, but when you're positive goal differential, you're going to be hanging around the playoff race. So I think the the shooting percentage is definitely helping. They are only generating 42% of the high danger chances at 5
That's
on
where
5
I'm going
during this stretch.
there. Yeah, it's like how are they scoring the goals? And I think there's room for improvement, I think, in their ability to maintain some of these numbers that we just went over, right?
They certainly need to create more in terms of high danger opportunities and scoring chances. But we're talking about a 9-game stretch, and during that 9-game stretch, about half of it has been without Tage Thompson. So a little bit of leeway given there in terms of their ability to create. The fact that they're finding ways to get different types of goals. Is it sustainable to get that type of shooting percentage and those types of goals? Probably not. But to do it without Tage Thompson is, I think most people would agree that if they didn't have Tage Thompson, and you just had this team as it stands without him, it's probably not a playoff team. But they'll be getting him back soon, if not Wednesday, pretty soon thereafter, I would think. And once he's back, now they have a little bit of confidence going that, hey, we found ways to scrape together some points and get things done without him. So certainly, like I said, definite red flags in that they're not creating as much as they're actually getting. But within the context of the games and finding ways to come back and, some difficult circumstances given injuries, not too many glaring red flags, especially when you zoom it out to their whole sample size. So it's a little bit of both. It's a mixed bag, but that's what you would also expect from a team that is looking like the 7th or 8th best team in the Eastern Conference right now. They're not, we're not talking about a team that is leading the league in points or that 10-game winning streak they had a couple of seasons ago when they were. If my research is right on this will be, if they can get through Wednesday in a playoff position, it'll be the first time since that 10-game winning streak and only the second time during the drought. So that they've been in playoff position at Thanksgiving. So that season obviously came with a collapse where they lost 18 of 26 games and finished in 27th in the NHL. But
yeah, that was awesome.
This is different. This is different because that was Jeff Skinner on an absolute heater, right? I think he was shooting like 30%. They were winning all sorts of games in overtime. There was just a lot of nonsense to that 10-game winning streak, fun as it was, I'm sure, for fans. This is a little bit more balanced. The team is, by most advanced metrics, pretty much middle of the road in the NHL.
Middle of the road, yeah.
And they are going to be, they keep playing this way, hanging around, scratching and clawing for one of those spots. And if they get a little lucky, which teams can do over the course of a season, right? If that shooting percentage, if nobody in Buffalo, players, management, coaches, fans, anybody is going to, poo-poo the Sabres if they get good luck, right? After 13 years without the playoffs, I think anybody in the league that's like, man, that shooting percentage, that's going to get them at some point. If they get 1 year with an out of the ordinary shooting percentage, they probably have, I don't know if they've earned it at this point, but I think the fan base probably deserves, a fortuitous bounce, but it's something to keep an eye on.
Well, I mean, they're getting good results here, and at the end of the day, that's really all that matters. But I do think that there's a lot of room for improvement. So even, watching the last 2 games of the West Coast road trip, they're still not, we already talked about the high danger chances. I think just even without high danger, they still need to get better looks at the net. You and I have talked about this team. They have the puck a lot more, it seems, this season, but they're not getting still quality looks all the time, right? And when they do, they're missing the net a lot. That has to continue. Yeah.
A number to support that before you finish your point. They have the 10th best
go ahead.
Core percentage in the NHL at 5-on-5 this season, but they are under 50% in generating scoring chances, high danger chances, and expected goals at 5-on-5. So to your point,
you're out of whack. Yeah.
To your point, they are getting they are getting more shot attempts than the other team at 5-on-5 consistently, but not getting the scoring chances, high danger chances, and expected goals that typically come along with that, which tells me they are not getting, where they're shooting from they're missing the net a lot, which we know they are, and some of those shots are not coming from, or shot attempts are not coming from areas of the ice that typically result in goals. So that's why they get a lot of shots blocked, and that's why they miss the net a lot, because the shots aren't coming from the spot that you want to get to score goals. So just to support your point a little bit there, that they're still, the possession is there. They're dumping the puck at a much higher rate than they were last season, which I find really interesting. And they're getting used to that. They're getting good at that. They're retrieving the puck. They're getting ozone time, but now
they're a
turning
faster team,
much faster, more
you're
physical.
you're strategizing to your players, like coach to your strengths, or just like jam your system in. They actually have the guys that can play that system now. And that's kind of interesting. I didn't know that, but I do feel it. And you're seeing it also. They, like, even on the power play, they've adjusted. It's almost become too predictable. They're still doing the drop pass, and then when they get to the line, if they're stacked, if the opposition is kind of stacking that blue line, trying to jam them, they're dumping it in. Where early in the season they weren't. Now, and it's working, right? Because they actually have started to score more on the power play. So
I think it also, I've been asked this question a few times, and it's something that's hard to pinpoint, but I think this is one area where it's pretty clear that you can say adjusting to Lindy Ruff's style has taken a little bit of time, right? That they were not a heavy dump in team under Don Granato. They were very much relying on zone entries and, carrying the puck in. To play that style is a real mindset shift. And I think definitely takes some time to, people think about forechecking as a simple effort thing. And effort is a big part of it. And desire and willingness to hit and be hit is a big part of it. But there's also very much a skill and tactics involved, where you put the puck on your dump in, how in sync you are with your line mates about who's F1, where the other guys are going in order to keep possession. Not all dump ins are created equal. You need to get it to a place where you have a high percentage chance of retrieving it. It's not
make
just
the defenseman vulnerable.
Yeah, and it's not just mindlessly dumping it in to get a change, right? It's I think Zemgus Girgensons was always really good at this, just like that soft touch into the zone where he's already a step ahead of the defenseman because he knows where the puck is. And over the course of a game, that wears down a defenseman too, right? That makes it harder to play defense, and mentally and physically, I think wears them down. So the NHL's gone away in years before this one, had gone away from that style of play, but I think you're seeing more teams bring it back. Florida kind of leading the charge there as a team that is willing to dump the puck and outwork you. But there's a strategy to it. There's a skill to it as much as there is, sheer determination. And I think building that habit and building that skill is something that we're starting to see some results from with the Sabres.
It's funny that you mentioned Zemgus. John Cristiano, who was a longtime pro scout for the Sabres. He was on the Amerks bench. He was on the Sabres bench for a little bit. He used to tell guys, he used to call it the $1 million flipper. I can teach you how to make $1 million a year simply by flipping the puck in the air on a little soft dump. And and
Yeah.
if there was a little, you're right though, in terms of strategic use of that tool. But no, I think you're also right. I mean, you don't just dump the puck to get it off your stick and like escape pressure. You go in, F1 hits the body, F2 goes and scoops up the puck, and you get possession back. It's not like you're just giving up possession. You're using it as a tool to almost keep possession, even if you lose it momentarily. And that does matter. You got to know where the defender is, where you place that puck, put yourself in a better spot to hit him and win it back. So no, I love that point that you make. On the power play though, it's almost like that reflex. They're dumping it in now all the time at the line. I want it to just be more of an option, but we can talk about that down the road, because they've had opportunities where they're kind of needless. Like they don't need to dump it in. They could carry it, gain the zone, and offer the opponent a different look on the zone entry on the PP and keep them guessing, because it's getting a little predictable at the same time, I noticed. But you mentioned Lindy and guys adjusting to his style. And I think part of this stretch, it's not just the opponent and them winning games that they should be winning. I do think that there's this element where he has figured out how to communicate to these guys, both as a group, but also at the individual player level. And by the way, it also feels like Seth Appert is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. I don't know if it's just camera shots on the bench, but I'm kind of my take with Seth right now is that he's a big part of this that maybe we don't realize. Lindy's going to get all the credit. And it almost feels like Appert's an associate coach and not an assistant. And there is a difference. I don't know. Are you kind of feeling the same? Like you're down there more. I'm making judgment based on like camera shots that I see on the bench, and Appert's almost his posture is almost like a head coach. He almost, I would be expecting at some point, probably after this season, like a promotion to associate. That's like
Yeah.
where I think it's trending.
I mean, he has mixed in on occasion for Lindy's media availabilities, which is not typical. You know, it never happened under Don Granato that you would see Matt Ellis popping in, you know, to answer questions. Not that those guys weren't available. You know, the Sabres do make those guys available upon request typically, but you know, they've given Lindy a random day off here and there from media to have Seth Appert do it. Now, part of that is probably that Seth is fantastic in front of the microphone, right? He's great storyteller. He's, you know, really insightful and shares a lot of what he's thinking. He's got great familiarity with a lot of these players, probably even, you know, more so than Lindy Ruff does. And so he's certainly a guy you would want up there representing the team. But also there, you know, to your point, I think there's an element of, you know, getting him ready for the gig, right? Lindy Ruff is 64 years old. And, you know, I think in an ideal world, Lindy Ruff would help them become a playoff team again for a few years. And, you know, Seth Appert, when he's ready to be a head coach, would be a head coach here. You know, I think that would be best case scenario. Now that requires team level success, but I think even if you watched that mic'd up that they did with Lindy Ruff, you know, I think it was the Montreal game that he was mic'd up, and it's, you know, just him on the bench. There's a lot of Appert, you know, handling a lot of things on the bench, but also his input on, you know, Lindy telling him what he's thinking with a line and Appert telling him, no, I think I'd go with this guy. And Lindy's listening to him, right? You know, there's a collaboration happening between those two guys that is really smart, I think, on Lindy Ruff's part. And I think it's part of what has made Lindy Ruff such a successful coach over the entirety of his NHL career. His willingness to learn, his willingness to adapt, but his willingness to kind of accept input from a lot of different, to just know what he doesn't know at times, right? To look to a guy like Seth Appert, who coached, what, half this roster in the AHL at some point, maybe not quite half, but a good chunk of this roster, either in the AHL or in training camp. You know, he's been in the organization, really intimately involved in how this team and how a lot of these individuals have developed. And that's valuable insight, I think, for Lindy Ruff to lean on, and he's doing it in some key spots. So it's a good observation by you.
No, I just thought it was interesting. And the funny thing is, I did see some of that mic'd up, and my only other takeaway was just kind of a silly one. It's like Lindy almost sounds at times like just another fan yelling at the ice. I don't know if you noticed that also. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, I think you would probably find that with, you know, that if you mic'd up any NHL coach, yeah, it's probably a lot of that, right? Like, dump it, go, 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 shoot it. You know, just a lot of barking out orders that you wonder if guys are even hearing. So extracting, you know, interesting little nuggets from that is always tough, but it is fun to see some of the behind the scenes, just a little bit of what he's like in that setting, because otherwise you're kind of just trying to read body language off the broadcast.
So the Sabres now, Minnesota on Wednesday night. We kind of teed that up. Sounds like they're going to come in pretty healthy. It's going to be a tough test. It's going to be a tough test. Kind of curious to see if Tage, you know, I know that they didn't have practice today, so it's kind of hard to say. All signs seem to point to Thompson coming back this week. Other injury updates, sounds like Greenway is still off a little bit here.
Yeah, he was in the week-to-week bucket before they left, so that leads me to believe, there's still a little bit of runway there before he's fully healthy. We had a question about, if there had been any roster moves today, and there have not yet been any. So, everybody that was up is still up. Isak Rosen, Yuri Kulik, and Thompson's still on IR. Greenway still on IR. So they are status quo at the moment, but I do get the feeling that Tage Thompson's getting closer. But credit to them for being smart with him, because he has, I think last season put himself in some trouble coming back early from that injury. And that was, I think, you had a less experienced coach, but also a coach under a lot more pressure, right? And, knowing that he needed that was a team in a pretty desperate situation. And I think a lot of people recognize that. Not that they shouldn't be equally desperate organizationally right now, but I think Lindy Ruff is just a bit more steady and probably learned from his early season mistakes of Dahlin jumping into the lineup too quick and Benson playing through that injury for too long, to say, all right, it also certainly sounds like it's a soft tissue injury based on what Tage Thompson is describing when he talks about the injury as one that could easily, flare up if he goes back too soon. So that to me makes me think they're taking a smart approach here. They've also been winning. You win 3 straight, and you get that winning streak without Tage Thompson in the lineup. That's definitely a nice confidence booster.
No, I agree. We're over 50 minutes in on this lunch hour edition of the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. By the way, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that little like button. Helps out. I didn't tee it up at the beginning of the show. If you're not subscribed to the channel, and hit that notification bell, when Matthew and I go live, definitely do so as well. I'm seeing some new faces and names in the chat, so that's encouraging. Maybe this little time change today is assisting with that. I guess we'll see. Matthew, I don't know if you have anything teed up in the chat. If you do, I'm just going to get through my plugs real quick on Prospect Avenue. Put another episode out. My core competency, I think most of you people know, is I sit around on my ass and watch the Sabres prospects too much in my life. Put another episode of Prospect Avenue out yesterday. Just bringing in some updates there on what's been happening abroad. Go check that out. That is not a live show. I pre-record that and dump it up on YouTube when it's done. You can also find that on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast under the Prospect Avenue feed. This podcast also, even though we do it live, you can find the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show also on Apple, Spotify, everywhere podcasts are available. And we always appreciate if you could leave a 5-star review. It helps the show. Matthew, as we kind of wind things down today, is there anything in the chat that you want to get to? Hey, by the way, I feel like this has been a good show because I had some good notes today. So gold star, you get a gold star on your chart today, kind of like I used to get when I didn't wet the bed when I was 3 or 4 years old. I had a little chart because I was always pissing my pants because I was an absolute train wreck. But you get a gold star today.
That's good. That I'll have to hang that on the chart in the kitchen when I get upstairs. I'm gonna pull up this chat from David Dietz, because I could be wrong, but I think David's a new face, a lunchtime hour face that maybe is not always.
Oh, David is an old face, and I'm not saying an old man, but David,
I think he's been in here before, but I don't know that he's always on our midnight editions of
That's
the show.
true. But no, David's he's a lifer with us.
I got a laugh out of this when we were talking about scoreboard watching. He said scoreboard watching as a Sabres fan before Thanksgiving in this economy. Well, get used to it. I think it's going to be kind of fun and not even that, but just looking around. I think if you're a Leafs fan, right, you're probably like, all right, we got to watch Florida, see where they're at, see who's going to win this division. But it's going to be a chaotic mess that the Sabres are involved in, whether it's third in the Atlantic or the wild card spot. You're going to be watching. It's going to be a game to watch every night with a potential rooting interest. So well,
and on that train of thought, real quick, we know that Tampa is tonight against Colorado. Tomorrow is Boston, Vancouver, and then I believe Wednesday, while the Sabres are playing, you also have Tampa, Washington, which is a fun one with some definite
tough schedule for
there.
Tampa lately. They've that's not easy, but so Washington has built up a nice cushion for themselves, but Ovechkin being out for the next month plus might open the door there. We'll see how they handle that. But that is another team that could be in the wild card mix that if they fall down to earth, that just opens up things a little bit for the Sabres, and percentage wise, certainly helps their chances.
Yeah,
Throw
Bruins
this up.
Islanders on Wednesday night. That's a fun one. That's a fun night of hockey.
That's
But
a big
I
one.
had to validate that. I didn't want to make sure I wasn't making something up. The Capitals do visit Tampa on Wednesday as well.
So yeah, those are both, games that are going to be, and that's the way the schedule sets up, which, Sabres fans are used to just gnashing their own teeth around Thanksgiving time, watching their team and, rooting on a prayer. But right now they're in a spot where the 24% number, whatever it is from the Athletic, feels about right, maybe a little low. I think the emotion of the fan base right now, it feels a lot higher to them that, there's a 50-50 or better chance. The model doesn't have the same faith, but that's, I still think 25% chance is a pretty good spot to be compared to where they were.
Yeah.
You start 3-7-1, you're talking about, almost as good a chance to land the first pick as a playoff spot. And now here they are, 25%, closing the gap on the other teams every day and building a nice little cushion. I think this is a worthy question here from Joe Wasik, who we did not get into Yuri Kulik too much in this episode, but really interesting trip for him because he played well. He was excellent against the Ducks. I have the numbers in front of me here. The Sabres had a 10-2 advantage in shots, 75% of the expected goals, and 71% of the scoring chances when Kulik was on the ice at 5-on-5. He won more than 60% of his faceoffs, and he scored the game-winning goal. Great goal. He got the little the player of the game vest that they've been passing around in the locker room. You can see the confidence in him after going down for a little bit. Got the taste early in the season, goes down, comes back up. Playing center is really interesting because
Ballsy.
Lindy Ruff mentioned the fact that he was winning faceoffs is part of why he was on the ice in overtime at all. And faceoffs have been a problem for this team for a while. They're not great. And a left-handed shot who can win a faceoff makes him an interesting fixture in the lineup. And I do think, the question from Joe is Kulik up for good? And I think he's up for now. These things are ever changing and always evolving depending on who's healthy and how a guy is playing. I think they have some runway with the Greenway injury, and they have, the advantage of time to figure out how's Kulik going to be playing in a week or two when Greenway's healthy. And then from there, I think even when everyone's healthy, if he's playing like this, you need to find a spot for him because he's valuable. You can't overthink it too much. And he is helping your team and serving a role. The question then becomes who's not playing center if he's playing center. And is he a center long term? And those may be better questions for our resident prospect expert here, who's been watching this guy more than anybody.
There are better questions that we're going to answer on the next episode that you and I do, maybe as soon as tomorrow, because I don't want to get too deep into Kulik today, because I think that it works into a greater conversation that you and I are going to have. And we should set that up now, I think, about line structure, reimagining the lines when Tage comes back into the lineup, the fact that Kulik is playing well. And by the way, I think he had like a little over 14. He had 14:45 against San Jose, 15:46 overtime, assisted by some of the overtime work that he got. Those are nice numbers for a guy middle in the lineup that's not on your first power play. I don't think he was on the first power play unit, was he? Oh, actually, no, I think he was.
I think he might have been, yeah.
I think he was. But in LA, he only had 10 minutes, 9:58. I think there's a lot, like I put it this way. You and I, the past couple episodes, we're talking about Kevin needs to do something, make trades, bring in some top six help. Kulik's looking like a guy right now that maybe takes the pressure off of that conversation.
I
if
think
it keeps
so.
going. And I think that him going down to Rochester really helped him. So first of all, though, to answer your question, I will answer your question. I like him down the middle because I think it gets him more dialed in. I think that the commentary on his defensive game off the puck when he was in 18 and 19, especially last year. I think 18, you're going to expect the guy that needs some ramp up time to learn and the details. When you're a young guy and you can score a shit ton of goals when you're 15, 16, 17, the coach is just going to let you do that. They're not going to put the focus on you learning the finite details of what it's going to take to really be a successful NHL player when you don't have the puck. I thought last year, a lot of the negative commentary about his defensive game was overblown. You see it now. His stick is good enough. As long as he keeps his feet moving, he doesn't get lazy and start reaching. Like I think he did in the very first game when he got in over in Czechia, right?
He did, yeah.
You got it. So his stick is really good. Isak Rosane, stick detail, really good. These are young guys that have been coached very well by Seth Appert and the assistants. So I like him down the middle. I like him when he's got the puck on his stick. He doesn't need to be the fastest guy, but you know what? He's got more explosive with his skating. And you really notice that when he went down to Rochester, the foot races that he was winning, the strength development that was kind of a storyline with Kulik during training camp. You really notice it when he's at that level. So I think that having him here as a guy that can play center, you have this opportunity to reimagine your lines. And maybe you don't need to load your top six with your most gifted, offensively skilled players. It's going to give you a little bit more of that dynamic to maybe solve some of the issues that the Sabres have with their expected goals and getting guys in front of the net and matching skill sets maybe that you haven't thought of in the past. And they just had to force themselves to jumble some of that on this trip. And I want to rank guys. Who are your best forwards, regardless of role, that get to the front of the net? I don't know if there's a stat for that, but those are the guys that I want to look at.
We could definitely figure that out. Okay. I think you'd probably put number 9
we're going to talk about that,
list, but we'll get
9
to that.
and Zucker, right?
Yeah.
I think you're there. And it's going to be important to talk about. We're going to do that tomorrow. Let's commit now to do another show tomorrow.
Yeah, let's get a practice in. They're going to practice tomorrow at 11. We'll get eyes on, I would imagine Thompson will at least be skating. Maybe he'll be taking line rushes, and then you'll see, because we did have a few questions about that. Like, can they mix and match more than they have? Can they, I think that's a good topic to get into about how do you balance out this.
That's why I didn't want to get into Kulik too in depth today. I'm glad you put it up though. I mean, let's, do you have anything else in the chat before we close out? Cause I'm already looking forward to the next episode.
There's a few questions about that I also think are valuable for the next show. About trades, and I think we are reaching that point in the calendar where you start to look at some potential targets. And there was a juicy report from Elliot Friedman just before we went live that the Rangers are willing to shake things up, and Chris Kreider's name is being floated along with Jacob Trouba. And man, I would almost say those are two guys. Like, could there be two guys that could, better solve some of the problems that the Sabres have? It's, I think, probably a topic for another show about, some of the targets they could go after. Probably one that we'll get into this week, because I think I'm going to write about it this week. But, David here asks, if there's one impact trade, would you rather have a top 4 right D to play with power or a top 6 forward? I think that's something we can get into tomorrow, because when we look at the lines, we'll have a better idea of, where are they lacking and, what do they need. But the short answer to the Kreider question is an emphatic hell yeah, because that guy is kind of everything this forward group could use in terms of experience, playing style, mentality. He'd be like a Zucker plus in a lot of ways, and I think would really help, what they could bring, with the obvious caveat that he's got a 15-team no trade clause, and there's that piece of it, but he checks every other box. So I think that's another one that we can get more into. But I'll leave it with this, and it's probably something that people will take away from this show anyways. 2 comments. One from John is, when they learn to play Montreal and Detroit the way they play Dallas and the Rangers, they'll be a winning team. Until then, they'll hang around the edge of the playoffs. On the one hand, every team's going to have stinkers. On the other hand, John's point is a good one, that when you finish off teams, whether you're playing well or not, and collect easy points, that's what makes you a team that comfortably gets into the playoffs. And Colin's point here, Kevin Adams and the Sabres should not be comfortable. If they are, they haven't learned from the past. And I think every Sabres fan can agree with that one, because I think every Sabres fan, even the optimistic ones, are feeling a little bit of hesitation because of the 10-game win streak, because of the 8 wins in 9 games, they had to start under Ralph Kruger a few years ago. They should not be comfortable. And I think Lindy throwing the standings up in the locker room last week serves a dual purpose. It serves the purpose that when you're out of it, or when you're on the outside looking in at the actual playoff picture, you can see that, hey, it's not that far away. But it also shows you that when you're in it, you might wake up, they're feeling pretty good on Saturday night, right? They're sitting there and they're like, hey, we're in the playoff picture. We're third in the Atlantic. Eyeballs emojis, right? But then you could wake up on Tuesday, having not played in a few days. You might be out of a spot, right? The Bruins could win, the Lightning could win, and then things change a little bit. I think that's an important reminder to these guys to keep their foot on the gas and not be feeling themselves too much. Like, it's Thanksgiving, that's an important benchmark, but those 80% of the teams that make it because they're in a spot at Thanksgiving don't get there by accident, right? The stat isn't the stat because teams can't come back after Thanksgiving. The stat is the stat because the good teams are the good teams, right? And 80% of the good teams usually show themselves about 25 games into the season, and they continue that pace. Sabres need to show that they're one of those good teams for real and not one of the 20%.
I think they're going to find out an answer to that question on Wednesday night against a very good team that does really well on the road, Minnesota Wild. But we will get together before that. We're not going to wait to talk until after that game. So I'm gonna bring us out of here, if you're good with that. We're gonna do, I think, and there's another thing too. I want to make sure you and I think both could do a better job of this, is looking back at the chat once we're done. I have a hard time looking at the chat, but I think there's a lot of good topics for us to kind of build and answer questions that come up in the chat. I'm going to do that today. I'm going to ask you to do the same. All right. I probably could have done that offline, but I was just thinking about it now. So whatever. This is how it goes. I'm trying to keep you engaged in the show sheet. I'm trying to keep you engaged. I love it. Spoiling me, baby.
I did good. I earned a gold star. I'm going to go for 2 in a row.
All right. Okay. I think that's it. Matthew, I did a plug on the front end. You want to do a plug for where everyone can find your work?
Yeah, you can find everything at theathletic.com/Sabres. I have a fun story coming out. Just got a note from my editor while we were doing this. The story will be out tomorrow, and it is inspired by the chat. So people can read that and everything else at theathletic.com/Sabres, and they can know that stuff they put in the chat could end up in the written word on theathletic.com. So you can find everything I do there. It's the best place to find me. You can find me on X, find me on Blue Sky at the same handle, just my name. And yeah, smash that like button and leave a 5-star review.
Well, that's Matthew's plugs. I think everyone knows you can find me at Sabres Prospects on X, same handle across all social media, except for Instagram. You can find me on Instagram if you search my name, where I just post pics of cocktails and food. Had a good one over the weekend. Dog and Pony Saloon, South Buffalo. They're not paying me a dime to say this, but you got to get there, man. Great cocktails, great food, good chef. I had a miso barbecue slider, meatball slider. I was supposed to go to Wegmans. I was like, we're going to go to the bar. Really good. But yeah, that's where you can find me. All right, I'm going to take us out of here. For Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic, for the production crew that hopefully is out clearing the final batch of leaves and taking them to the street, I'm Kris Baker. We're going to see you again very soon, right here on the Sabres Prospect YouTube channel. Until then, we'll see you next time.